No social media. There was the Telegraph and the Pony Express. It's April 14th, 1865. President Abraham Lincoln was brutally shot by a well-known actor while attending a play at Ford's Theater, just blocks from the White House. The assailant is a young man identified as John Wilkes Booth. He is on the run. Will President Lincoln survive? Will Booth be caught? Fast forward 98 years to November 22nd, 1963. President Kennedy has been shot in Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. Will LBJ succeed this young, vibrant man before the day's end? Everyone is glued to the black and white television. Telephones and party lines are ringing off the hook as the nation is grieving once again. Fast forward 136 years from that night at Ford's Theater. Social media on the rise and everyone glued to cable news and the major networks. It's September 11th, 2001. The morning's news travels very differently from that night in D.C. in 1865. The places that memorialize these events are easily found in our nation's capital. As visitors passed by the place Lincoln was seated and the bedroom where he drew his last breath, to the eternal flame of President John F. Kennedy's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, just to the west of the Potomac, only a few miles from 10th Street Northwest and F Street Northwest, and dropping just to the south to the premises of the Pentagon, the 9/11 Memorial. How can we not reflect on these events that transformed and redirected the future of the United States of America? Welcome to day 3 of our epic 4-day Washington, D.C. walking tour. I consider this to be our most reflective and introspective day of them all. Day 1 encapsulated a 5-mile trek around the most well-known memorials found on the western end of the National Mall and around the tidal basin. Day 2 was our hit-the-ground-running walking tour to the eastern end of the National Mall in the morning, and then a complex set of excursions to rewarding sites found in the central section of the National Mall, to some of the most impressive architectural structures in America, and maybe even the world. For those of you that have followed this series so far, you know that workarounds have become a subtle theme of this incredible field trip to our nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Our adventures will stray from the National Mall, crossing the Potomac River and also venturing north of Pennsylvania Avenue. Today's featured sites include the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial, a look at Arlington National Cemetery, and then a side stop checking out the free exhibits at the Museum of the Bible, and then our primary goal of seeing inside the Ford's Theater and the Petersen's house. Will we make it to all of these sites? Will there be any necessary workarounds? How did we reach these meaningful places? All these questions will be answered here in day 3 as you travel across America with me at this filled to the brim bucket list urban attraction. The Metro train from Branch Avenue Green Line to L'Enfant Plaza will be our chosen way to enter our nation's capital on day 3. Noting that our son will be catching a midday flight, he will be reaching the Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport via rail. This was a great option, which allowed us to continue to sites that he had seen on his visit a few months back. With my feet retaped with kinesio tape and my Skechers dried out, I was ready for day 3. Our first planned stop was at the Pentagon. The gift shop near the Pentagon train station opened at 7 a.m., but we weren't positive we could get in. It was hard to determine the required clearance procedure for visiting this property. Would it be possible to at least get to the gift shop? We saw that the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial was located on the opposite side of the massive, famous-shaped government building from the train station access point. We boarded a train at L'Enfant to reach the Pentagon, arriving there at 9 a.m. The line of people at the security gate to enter the Pentagon was literally right at the ground level from where we exited the train. The Pentagon guard was clear. We had to have advance clearance even to get into the gift shop. I don't understand that. But whatever, this was sort of a last-minute place to go on our to-do list anyway. We asked him about reaching the memorial, and he said to go to the end of the sidewalk and follow the signs that wrapped around the massive building. With some intrepidation, we walked the long path through construction areas, passing through the ginormous parking lot, and following the signs. There were several men chatting at the entrance of the memorial. I confirmed that we could walk around the fenced-in memorial and take pictures, to which they said, of course. I have to tell you, this property is a bit intimidating. I noticed some high-tech porta-potty facilities, which we were in need of. Remember, no potties in the train stations or on the trains. So go when you can, when you have the option. This is a beautiful and unique memorial. We claim this ground in remembrance remembrance of the events of September 11th, 2001, to honor the 184 people whose lives were lost, their families, and all who sacrificed that we may live in freedom. We will never forget. We will be forever grateful to the thousands of people from across the nation and around the world who contributed their time, resources, and energy to create this memorial. While there, we gazed at the Pentagon building, noticing the change in coloring where the repairs had been made. After returning to the station, our next stop was Arlington National Cemetery, basically the adjacent property. When the lights start flashing, this is your warning that a train will be speeding in. We hopped on the Blue Line, as I taught you in day 2, the Blue Line to Largo. The first stop was Arlington National Cemetery. Boy, this beats walking and driving for sure. You will need to walk a few blocks from the station exit to reach the Arlington National Cemetery Visitor Center. We caught a few photos of statues, as they are absolutely everywhere. I really wanted this one of Admiral Byrd. The tales surrounding this Rear Admiral have always intrigued me. You will pass through security screening before reaching the displays, gift shop, restrooms, and access to the trolleys serving the cemetery. No personal cars are allowed. Because I have already presented a complete video on this sensitive, emotional, astounding place that every American should see, I am going to only present a summary and include the photos that our son took. He had not been there before, and with only minutes to spare before his flight, we agreed he would long-leg it in the mist up to the Kennedy family graves and to the tomb of the unknown soldier. I can't encourage you enough to watch my full video on Arlington National Cemetery, which includes a dynamic view of the changing of the guard. This is a life-changing place that will stir even the coldest individual. At least I hope so. And here's a travel hack. Since Paul was flying out midday, he had a carry-on that needed to be stowed away while we saw the morning sights. There are various places in big cities around the world that have lockers for this purpose. He had found one at the Cleaner of Cleaners, a few blocks from L'Enfant. That would suffice. Because of this, we had to take the train back to L'Enfant so he could get his carry-on. Plus, we planned to spend the rest of the day in the inner city area. We grabbed an iced latte with him at Casey's coffee shop across from the NASA headquarters before we parted ways. There was a group of men at the adjacent table that were speaking rather loudly about their dealings with NASA's staff. I wish I could have sat in on that conversation. In minutes, he would be boarding the plane to fly out from this epic adventure. He re-entered L'Enfant to ride the train to the airport. This seems like a lot of unnecessary back and forth, but the convenience and frequency of the trains makes it doable and the best option. Now, we were walking several blocks to reach the Museum of the Bible. This place had been highly recommended to us. We found out there were free exhibits on the first floor. The major exhibits are behind a steep paywall. For the most part, our trip has cost very little. Frankly, the only cost so far was a couple of hot dogs and a nice dinner. I did buy those great National Archives sunglasses that met an unfortunate demise, though. We really didn't have time or plans to devote to this museum in what would be a reasonable amount of time. Like everywhere in D.C., you must pass through security screening, but what we saw was amazing. The main display was the Megiddo Mosaic, which was excavated between 2004 and 2008. These types of findings are absolutely phenomenal and are incredible testaments in stone of history. Excellent signage explain the meaning, making, and reason for this huge mosaic. The northern inscription includes the name of the artist who created it. This signature is the earliest one that has been found in a mosaic in the Holy Land. The mosaic is made of tens of thousands of limestone tesserae in 10 different shades. Conservators found that every 4 by 4 inch square contains between 45 and 65 tesserae. I'm sure I'm not saying that right. Somebody please correct me in the comments. This means that the estimated total number of tesserae in the mosaic is between 230,000 and 340,000. Wow. Other objects and artifacts are beautifully displayed in this gallery. I can see how people could devote a full day to this museum. Just accessing the free exhibits on the first floor are compelling and time-consuming. Maybe when we return to DC another time and do those next time workarounds, this stop will be included in our itinerary, along with the United States Botanical Garden that was under renovation and the popular close-by Spy Museum. The ceiling in the foyer of this museum is gorgeous. Ancient civilizations, architecture, and archaeology is an area of study that is not in my wheelhouse, but I certainly find it interesting. We passed through the second free exhibit. The third one was not open. The second was titled The House of David, circa 840 to 800 BC. Wow. The stone preserves the first ancient reference to King David's dynasty ever discovered. The king of Aram Damascus created this inscription about 150 years after the time of David. Truly incredible. Discovered in northern Israel in 1993, the Tel Dan Stele is the earliest archaeological artifact to reference the House of David. Carved in Aramaic by a foreign king in the 9th century BC, the inscription offers independent confirmation that a dynasty bearing David's name was recognized in the ancient Near East. Its discovery has largely silenced debate about whether David was a historical figure, demonstrating that his legacy was known and acknowledged well beyond the pages of the Bible. It's time to get moving. Here's an important travel hack. We walked a few blocks west to L'Enfant Plaza. Remember, I mentioned that the orange arrows indicate the entrances, exits of the train stations? The escalators descending into the stations are sometimes hidden in plain sight. We were needing to take either the orange, blue, or silver line to Metro Center. Now, since we were headed in a northwesterly direction, we were looking for trains labeled Franconia Springfield, Vienna, or Auburn. One to Vienna was leaving in 2 minutes. I'm telling you, you just can't beat utilizing this way to get around the city. I neglected to tell you something important. You can purchase an all-day pass, which gives unlimited rides. We knew that we would be utilizing the train a lot today, so we loaded our Smart Trip that morning at Branch Avenue with a day pass. The day pass load is only good for that day. Perfect. We wouldn't have to pay attention to whether we had enough on our card as we scoured the city sites. Our son had the app and loaded the day rate on his phone. Important note, the day pass does not work toward the parking fee. You will need to load money on the pass to pay for discounted parking with your Smart Trip. Walking just a few blocks from Metro Center, we arrived at the front door of the visitor access to Ford's Theater, National Historic Site. And there, it was staring me in the face, our next workaround. I was absolutely stunned. The schedule board perched on the sidewalk made me shudder. The theater was closed for the rest of the day. The park ranger told me that rehearsals for a play were taking place and that we would need to return in the morning if we wanted to get inside the theater. About those Day 4 epic adventure workarounds, which including getting into the Supreme Court building and the U.S. Capitol, we are now adding Ford's Theater and possibly the old post office tower. Who knows? You will have to hit the notifications bell to be alerted when I post Day 4 next Monday. The ranger suggested that we take this opportunity to view the tremendous museum in the basement. Tickets are required, but are free and do not necessarily need to be obtained in advance. I think this is just a procedural counting process, but who really knows? During peak season, I suppose that there is a possibility you might have a long wait. The park passport stamp is at the ticket booth. Don't forget that stamp. Remember my travel hack I taught you about the stickers? If you miss the stamp at the ticket counter, there is another in the basement. We had allocated this time for the National Park Service unit, so let's proceed downstairs into the dark and very red series of rooms filled with displays about Lincoln's life, family, presidency, and the fatal night at Ford's Theater and final death of President Abraham Lincoln at the Petersen house across the street. The displays were not limited to Lincoln and the events at Ford's Theater, but much was presented about the Civil War, the presidency in general, and the city of Washington, D.C. Let me show you a few of the special items that we saw, not related to that fateful night. This is a flag fragment from the flag flown at Fort Sumter during the beginning of the Civil War. Not anything like the original Star-Spangled Banner, but still amazing. There was a wall filled with Lincoln family photographs, a handwritten note, shaving mug, gloves, inkwell, and paperweight of President Lincoln's are also on display. There is a ranger staged in the museum who will answer any of your questions. We found much ado about the security of the president, for Lincoln was the leader of the United States and the Union at that time, some of the most perilous years in our nation's young history. The possibility of his assassination had to be on the minds of his family, staff, military, and himself. His wife and staff seemed to be concerned, but Lincoln was not. We even read how a shot was fired toward him during an evening stroll, piercing his famous stovetop hat, and he was the only one to laugh it off. I've seen one of his iconic stovepipe hats, where the brim was worn from him tipping and removing his hat. That was so cool. Vital items are protected under temperature control, including this letter from President Lincoln to General George McClellan, relieving him of his duties because of his failure to defeat Confederate General Robert E. Lee. I have to say that this quilt was quite interesting. I will show it to you slowly. Simply historicity at its best, don't you agree? This quilt was made for the 1864 Sanitary Fair and was signed by many well-known politicians, artists, and military and religious leaders. Let me see who I recognize just real fast. Oliver Wendell Holmes, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, George Meade, William T. Sherman, Ulysses S. Grant, Abraham Lincoln, and Millard Fillmore. I'm sure there's a few more that I'm just not seeing right now. Oh yeah, there's Andrew Johnson, Samuel DuPont. I gotta stop. I love this poster about the Homestead Act. As a fan of the West, I am very familiar with the Homestead Act, signed by Abraham Lincoln. You can visit the Homestead National Historical Park just south of the city of Lincoln, which is named for the 16th president, in southeastern Nebraska. Speaking of national park units, don't miss going into the very small visitor center in the basement to grab a souvenir, like a postcard, and getting your passport book stamp. This location had a list of where the stamps could be found. I took pictures for reference because I was missing some. Part of that Day 4 workaround scene. Of course, one of the most popular exhibits was on the assailant, John Wilkes Booth, and the team that conspired and or aided him in the assassination of President Lincoln. One of those was a female. There was quite a bit of controversy over executing the death penalty by the federal government for the first time on a woman. Her name was Mary Surratt, and she would be receiving the death penalty for her involvement. The one item in the museum that was the most compelling was that of the actual murder weapon, a .44 caliber Derringer. Learn of the eerie encounter of Lincoln and Booth. That should make your eyes roll. When Booth fled the theater, he jumped and shattered his ankle or broke his leg, depending on what account you read. Dr. Samuel Mudd, who lived just to the south of D.C., over in Maryland, took care of his injury and is a complex part of this entire conspiracy surrounding this American tragedy. Lincoln fans more than likely know more about Mr. Mudd and the rest of the conspirators. The plot is thick and one that should be investigated more deeply by those whose interest has now been sparked. Let me show you a few more noteworthy items. This is an original piece of lace curtain from the presidential box at Ford's Theater, a framed fragment of wallpaper from the presidential box, the inner door to the presidential box. Though John Wilkes Booth may have used the hole in the door to survey the box and the location of the president and other occupants, he did not make the hole. According to the Ford family descendant, the hole was drilled by the theater manager to allow the theater staff to check on those in the private box whenever they needed. This is one of the pillows that was under Lincoln's head at the Petersen house. Note the bloodstains. And this is Booth's door wedge, a pine bar from a wooden music stand used by John Wilkes Booth as a wedge to keep the outer door to the presidential box closed after his entrance. This china looks familiar. Oh yeah, we saw the Lincoln's presidential punch bowl that matches it at the White House Visitor Center. In Day 1, also on display is a life mask. I had seen death mask before, but never a life mask. All the comments about Lincoln's face are of his declining features and expressions from the toll of the Civil War that was tearing apart this republic. I first mentioned this in my Day 1 video when I told you about the men who sculpted Lincoln for his memorial and the image they wanted to capture. This is a common theme that I have run across. One of the most recent sculptures of Lincoln that I saw was him seated in Grant Park in Chicago. This statue was done by the renowned sculptor Augustus St. Gaudens. Gaudens portrayed Lincoln's loneliness and burden of command. The amazing displays contained items like a switchblade knife, a compass, a signal whistle, knife and sheath. They even have the boot that Dr. Mudd cut away from Booth's leg to treat his injuries. Absolutely unbelievable. He was also carrying multiple handguns as shown in this terrific display. We are staring at ordinary items that became history. Do you remember me mentioning that in Day 2 of this 4-day epic adventure when we found some of the items that were in Lincoln's pockets when he had been shot? Oddly, it is reported that one of Lincoln's favorite forms of entertainment was the theater. Speaking of theater, the hallway to the theater is lined with time-stamped drawings recording the events of the day leading to this event that was so transforming. But as you know, we weren't getting into the theater today. And even though I did take a few photos of these events, I think I'll save them for when we actually proceed into the theater on Day 4. Tell me in the comments who would become the President of the United States upon Lincoln's death. And also, if you're a subscriber, I want to thank you. And if you're not, why not? Go ahead and subscribe. Let's go ahead and cross the road to go inside the Petersen house, where President Lincoln would draw his final breath on Earth. There are also aftermath exhibits, a gift shop, and snacks if you're getting hungry. I looked back across the front of the Ford's Theater, disappointed that we wouldn't be getting in, but just happy we had the option of tomorrow. I can't stress enough, have a workaround Loose Ends Day when visiting Washington, D.C. Abraham Lincoln died in this house April 15, 1865 at 7:22 a.m. The house was purchased by the United States in 1896. The sign reads that tickets are required, but we just walked walked in. I think the ranger saw us just crossing the street from the theater. Be sure to go inside the visitor center for Ford's Theater to get clear directions on all procedures. Frankly, I would call ahead to double-check opening and times for available programs. I have to read this compelling information. When Abraham Lincoln was shot at Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865, soldiers carried the unconscious president across the street to this house, where he died the next morning. Meet the residents who witnessed this historic event. This is really interesting. William and Anna Petersen immigrated from Germany to Washington, D.C. They lived in the basement, and they rented out the rest of the rooms on the other floors as a boarding house to supplement their income. At the time of the assassination, there were approximately 12 people living in the Petersen boarding house. Henry Safford was one of several Petersen boarders who worked in the War Department. On April 14th, he was reading by his second-story window when he saw a commotion in front of Ford's Theater. I raised the window and sang out, asking of those below what was the matter, and they replied that the president had been shot. Safford rushed to the front door. When soldiers carried Lincoln's body from the theater, Safford waved and cried out, "Bring him in here!" William Clark was a 23-year-old War Department clerk who rented the small room where President Lincoln died. Clark was not home when soldiers carried the dying president into his bedroom. He returned the next morning, and after Lincoln was removed from the house, Clark continued to sleep in the same bed. Since the death of our president, hundreds daily call at the house to gain admission to my room. Everybody has a great desire to obtain some memento from my room, so that whosoever comes in has to be closely watched for fear that they will steal something. The same mattress is on my bed, and the same coverlet covers me nightly that covered him while dying. That's kind of weird, don't you think? Oh, Willie Clark, wow. Henry and Julius Ulke were German-born brothers who lived on the top floor. Henry was an accomplished painter, and both were expert photographers. Together, they operated a popular portrait and photography studio on Pennsylvania Avenue. After soldiers removed President Lincoln's body from the Petersen house, the Ulke brothers photographed the room where Lincoln died. Paintings of the death of Lincoln do not seem to correspond with the size of the room, however. What do you think? When I started this video, I remarked about how the news traveled, and part of that is presented in this signage. On the night of April 14, 1865, the injured president was carried out of Ford's Theater and across 10th Street to the Petersen boarding house. The people of Washington crowded onto the street to wait for news of the president's condition. After a long, cold night, the news spread throughout the crowd that President Lincoln had died at 7:22 a.m. In a nearby parlor, once Lincoln had died, the Secretary of War began to operate the executive branch. He had many pressing events, like the capture of Booth and informing Vice President Andrew Johnson of the chain of events that would now place him in the highest office in the land. We left the narrow boarding house to enter the aftermath exhibits. There are 4 floors of exhibits, and guests ride an elevator to start at the 4th floor. The news of the president's death spread over the telegraph in obvious headlines throughout the world. I'm going to limit my discussion of all of these items we saw to this one interesting bit of text. Well, maybe not just this one thing, but I'll try. Shortly before 11 o'clock a.m., the door of the Petersen house opened and soldiers exited, carrying the president's body in a plain pine box. They placed it in a horse-drawn wagon, which rattled over the cobblestone streets to the White House, where doctors conducted an autopsy in a second-floor bedroom. If we ever get in the White House and take a tour, I'm going to find out which room that was. Isn't there a Lincoln bedroom? I wonder if that's what that really means. I don't know. One of the surgeons, Dr. Curtis, wrote this account of the autopsy. Suddenly, the bullet dropped out through my fingers and fell, breaking the solemn silence of the room with its clatter into an empty basin that was standing beneath. There it lay upon the white china, a little black mass, no bigger than the end of my finger, dull, motionless, and harmless, yet the cause of such mighty changes in the world's history as we may perhaps never realize. There were accomplices and co-conspirators. Atzerodt was to have killed Vice President Andrew Johnson, but couldn't follow through. Harold was assigned to kill Secretary of State William Seward. The plot was thick and much more intense and detailed than I ever knew. I was so glad to have learned so much more about this event. Tomorrow, I would see the scene of the crime at Ford's Theater. Harold surrendered to federal troops. Not surrendering, Booth was shot at close range by a man named Boston Corbett. The manhunt was now ended after 12 days at a farm in Port Royal, Virginia. Here was a truly unique display. Pieces of ropes which were used in the hanging of the Lincoln conspirators. And then there are the replicas of the hoods that were worn during the trial of the conspirators. The original hoods are part of the National History Museum. Got to put that on the list. I learned a lot at this National Park unit, and I hope hope that I've sparked your interest to go there. I have one more thing to show you that I saw while there. It wasn't this painting, although I found that a bit weird. This book tower was one of the cleverest displays I have ever seen. These are all books about President Abraham Lincoln. Don't touch! This was a full but shorter day. Time to return to Metro Center, L'Enfant, and Branch Avenue. We have one more day to go. Day 4, our final day in Washington, D.C. on our epic walking tour. New places and those critical workarounds will be satisfied. And dare I say, equally demanding and rewarding as days 1, 2, and 3. Hope you haven't missed any so far, but if you have, I wish that you take time to watch. Ugly Shoes on the Ground. Unclassic Road Trip. I appreciate your comments and your time. If you are enjoying this series, please share with a friend. I do have a history playlist for those of you that are history fanatics.